Welcome to our project on polar architecture. We're going to jump into a brand new world today, and we're going to look at architecture that's been designed in freezing temperatures in the northernmost part of the world where the polar ice caps are and the North Pole. And we're going to just see what kind of things people really build in this crazy climate. The very first thing most people think of course, the igloo. And you wouldn't be wrong. The igloo is a really popular picture that we all see. It's what we think of when we think about ice structures. And no doubt they are super cool. Very interesting in the way they're made. And that is a topic for another day. One fun fact about an igloo that I will leave you with before we move on to something even cooler is the way you know that an igloo is built properly is if you can stand right on top of it. Okay, moving on. What kind of buildings do we build in the polar ice caps? What kind of buildings really can go here? The one thing I want to talk about today is research stations. A research station is a place that's built within a landscape where people go to study something. And in Antarctica, people go to study all sorts of things. They are probably going there to study climate change. They may be there to study polar marine life. So there's lots of different reasons somebody might go there. When we very first started looking at how to build in this region with all of this ice and all of this cold, the very first buildings that were ever there were research centers. What you're looking at here is one of the very first research centers ever made in Antarctica. The thing they did is they built it just like a regular house, right on the ground. They built it like they would build in any other part of the world, but they didn't take into account the crazy climate. You can see up along the sides of this building all of this snow that's just been pushed by the wind up high. That's what they realized once they had been there for a season, that they really did not design their buildings properly. So this building actually got covered in snow. These guys left for a few months, came back, and guess what? Research Center is covered in 50 feet of snow. And so they had to come up with a new design. Their next design for a research center was actually to engage that idea of all of that ice and snow coming up and covering you. These scientists said, okay, we're going to be smarter about this. We're going to use a big steel round tube. It'll stay strong. It's the perfect shape. And we're going to be able to really do our work. Eventually, it got covered up just like the other one, except this time it was literally encased in an iceberg, which is what you see on the right. The first picture on the left is a picture of this building under construction. The picture on the right is after a couple of years. I think it survived for 7 years. They found it in an ice shelf when they went back. So, not the best design ever. Let me introduce you to what we're building there now. Two really important, cool things allow us to really build in this landscape and this climate. And they are legs that are on the building that move up and down. They're called hydraulics. And they also are usually placed on skis. Yes, I said skis, a building on skis. Very cool. So one of the things that the researchers realized early on, after they, of course, buried their buildings a few times, they realized that not only were their buildings being buried in the snow, but they were also moving because the earth beneath them moved about 5 feet a day. That's kind of a problem if you're studying the landscape because you want to be in the same place every day. You don't want to have your building moving once a day. So the researchers said, you know what? We need a really cool design that we can move back to where it needs to be so that we can maintain the same place and get our research done appropriately. So take a look at this really cool blue building. Look at the very bottom. Look at its legs. It looks like it's wearing snowshoes. These buildings are able to move up and down on those super cool hydraulic legs, and they can actually glide in the snow on those little skis. I'm going to show you just a few more examples of some very cool polar architecture. All of these are research centers. They're all built so that that snow won't accumulate around the walls like they did in that very first little wooden house I showed you. So just take a look at the different designs that have happened here. You're going to be designing some sort of a polar structure. You can decide to do some sort of a research center like this. And if you do, I really love this idea. So what they did is they have all these different little pods that can be fit together. So they all have little skis. If you look really close, they all have those hydraulic legs that move up and down. But these buildings can be taken apart and moved independently or put together as one big unit. I think the one in the middle looks a lot like an angry monster of some sort. This one is very cool. It looks a lot like a train. They've positioned it right there on the water. They've made it to where it's not so much in the big, huge wind because it's right there in front of the mountain. You have to think about all these climate things. This one's interesting. It has kind of an upstairs level on the left and a downstairs level on the right. These are actually living spaces for scientists. Here's one that's absolutely crazy. This one's not built. This is a fantasy or some sort of a proposal for the future. But this one is all about being an inflatable. So all those big white things that look like teeth, those are like balloons. So they have this inflatable outer shell. And on the inside, if you look really closely, you can see a living space. There's little places for you to be, and there's a staircase. It's kind of curved that goes up to a second level. The whole idea is that the whole entire thing can move around and roll in the landscape. So that yellow part in the middle is like a gyroscope. It always stays facing up. You're not turned around like a crazy ball machine. So you stay facing up, always in the up position. But the thing itself, the little mechanism, the big machine, it rolls around on the landscape. The idea behind it is that it's pushed by the wind. There's a lot of interesting research happening right now with drifters. And so we have the idea that you can send out some sort of a research vessel, whether it's on the water, in the air, or on the ground, and let it drift. And what it does is by drifting and going with the ways of nature and the wind, it's measuring that location and pathway. So it's a really interesting idea. Looks like a very fun carnival ride. So what's our project? What are we going to do? How are we going to get started? The very first thing I'd like for you to think about is the landscape. The landscape at the North Pole in Antarctica is severe. It is covered in ice. You're not going to get away from that. So the way that you think about designing that landscape could be that you're going to make sort of this base that gives you a little bit of a mountain, or maybe you just want a flat, snowy landscape. That's totally up to you. So I suggest making the base first, and then start to think about what kind of building do you want to explore. Whether it's a house, or maybe it's a restaurant. You might decide to build some sort of a rover like the image in the upper left. You might really like the idea of building a machine that explores the landscape. You can go anywhere with this project. I know you're going to do great, and I can't wait to see what you make.